where it really fits in terms of working in the margins. And if you want more information about the foundation, about stuff we do, you definitely check out our table after the event. I'd also recommend checking out, we have new t-shirts that are really cool, and they're made with sweatshop-free labor. That's why they're slightly more expensive, but it's definitely worth it. And we have a lot of new literature to check out as well. And we have 2 books from Reverend Charles Bear out there that you can purchase if you are interested. We will be passing around a donation bucket at some point, probably twice. This event is free, and so any donations you can give will be going towards covering the expenses of this event. And also sign up on our email list if you are not already on it. It's a low traffic, but just to kind of find out about events that we're hosting. So tonight we're going to basically be talking about, not we, but Charles. We will be talking about the topics of religious compassion and religious justice, the role of progressive religion in addressing social concerns. For example, with the war in Iraq is, I think, one of the big ones right now. And really how to put faith into action, because I think that's a very difficult question that people wrestle with, and it's a very hard thing to actually implement. And I think this is definitely very important given the climate that we are in. You have people like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, who get a lot of media attention, are very well known. The conservative religious right is just, all over the politics right now. And they have basically abandoned some of the needs of the community to go into a political arena. And I think tonight we're going to talk more about what progressive religion has to offer in terms of working in the margins, bearing witness to injustices, and giving a voice to the voiceless. So I think you are in for a treat. I want to thank first our co-sponsors tonight, Activist Forum, Community United Church of Christ, Progressive Resource Action Cooperative, St. Patrick's Social Action Committee, the UC Friends Meeting, University YMCA, and Vietnam Veterans Against the War CU chapter. And I'm going to go ahead and, do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want me to go ahead? I'll let him introduce himself, because I'm sure he could do it better since it's him. So thank you all for coming.
I don't really want to lecture as much as I want to chat with you. And I've got a bunch of lectures written because I do that. But I'm interested, first of all, in what the people who are here, what's your passion? What in this world excites you? What would encourage you to get off your rear end and do something? That's what passion is, by the way. That's what it does. And I'd rather kind of chat about some things and then bring in some of my material, but to listen to conversation, because one person speaking and everybody else sitting and listening is probably the worst form of communication there is. I'm much taken these days with nonverbal communication. We just had an event in our town that we had about 500 people there for an anti-war event. And but part of that was nonverbal, and part of it was going for 3 weeks. Because on a lawn, we had a Hollywood artist that worked for us put up in wires and on the trees 3,300 reflective stars. Why 3,300? Figure it out. There were paths along the ground, all kind of twisting and turning, with probably 250,000 stones, rocks, pebbles. Why 3,300 stars and hundreds of thousands of pebbles? Figure it out. And a plaque written by the designer who designed this exhibit, who signs himself as a retired Marine officer. Now, people will, by the way, we live right in the middle of 5 colleges, a seminary, and a graduate university. And we'll get 10,000 people buy that thing every couple of days, and they will say, what's that? And we're not going to tell them. But they'll know. They'll figure it out. Because I don't think you get people's attention about these kind of issues by getting them in a room and talking to them. I think you discover what their passion is. And people's passion gets generated in a great variety of ways. So as the evening goes on, I'd be very interested in hearing, in terms of what's going on in this world, what your passion is. What would produce getting off your rear end and doing something even if it's risky. Because passion always involves risk. So I want to talk a little bit. I'm a theologian. I teach in a theological seminary and spent years teaching in theological seminary in Australia. Cooperative seminary. We had in our faculty 3 Catholic, 2 Anglican, Baptist, Uniting Church, one other. Churches of Christ. So I tend to think theologically. And there's nothing any duller than a theological lecture. Unless it gets rooted in what's going on in the world. Because when theology does not get rooted in what's going on in the world, it's just kind of nice for people to like that sort of thing. And I'm going to offer a proposition and then try to defend it theologically and then in other practical ways that are out of that. And come in. But you can't sit way in the back. Well, that's not way in the back, that's pretty damn close. My proposition is this: that people who have heard and understood the Christian gospel ought to be involved in politics up to their neck. That's the proposition. People who've heard and understood the Christian gospel ought to be involved in politics up to their neck. Now that's far different than what the right wing is currently saying. Because the right wing does not understand that there's a separation between church and state. They get those things confused. Although all the issues, these people, by the way, these fundamentalists, by the way, are fascinated with sex. You realize that? Just overwhelmed by sex. No wonder so many of them get in trouble. Sometimes I wonder if that's all they think about. Look at all their issues. You know, homosexuality, gay marriage, abortion, sex outside of marriage. Oh, I wish they would find another issue so they wouldn't be preoccupied with sex and all these things they try to do as churches in order to get people elected. Now that's not what I mean. But I mean that Christian people who understand, have heard and understand the Christian gospel ought to get involved in politics up to their necks. Because fundamental to Christian faith, the Judeo-Christian tradition, is the social dynamic. And politics has to do with the social dynamic. Has to do with the root problem that goes on in culture that niceness doesn't handle. And compassion doesn't handle. We'll talk about that later. And the key word about that, and why Christian people who have heard and understand the gospel ought to be involved in politics up there in the necks, the key word to that is justice. Now, if you hear the President of the United States over the last few years talk about justice, he uses it like this: bring them to justice. And bring them to justice means to find them, arrest them, send them off to somebody that's going to torture them, probably. Get them tried somewhere, maybe. And make sure somebody executes them. Or don't try them at all, just hold them without rights forever. That's bringing them to justice. Now, I'd like to suggest that the key understanding of justice from the biblical point of view is something very different. How many of you know some Greek, some Koine Greek? Any of Greek students, Greek scholars here? Well, let me give you a little Greek lesson. There's a word in Greek that means a number of things. The word is dike, and it's cognates. The main cognate used in the scripture is a word called dikeosuna. Now, it doesn't mean bring them to justice by punishing them. The word dikeosuna means to take those things which are unequal and equalize them. That's what it means. So that Paul uses that. He says we are justified, dikeosuna, we are justified by faith. And God does this. What's that mean? That means that God, by God's action, takes that which is unworthy and lower and raises it up and gives it dignity. It's a relation. Dikeosuna is a relational word. So justification is that action of God by which that which is low is brought up. It's always that word, the dike word, is always relational. Another way that word gets used is just, and it's cognates. But the third way it gets used is when in Matthew, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." Righteousness. Luke says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst." But Matthew says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness." What is righteousness? Oh, righteousness is good living. Righteousness is kind of being holy, being without sin, being good, being noble, being righteous, being above the dirt. The word translated righteousness is dikaiosune. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after justice. Not righteousness. Justice. So that woven into Jesus' whole ministry is this notion of justice. So if you take Jesus' ministry, it was always taking those things which were unequal. Samaritans, women, go through the list. Tax collectors, the poor, nobodies, and justifying them. That is generating a just society by taking that which is nothing and bringing it into relationship with a something. And that's justice. Now, in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of much of the Old Testament, we've got the same word, dikaiosune, which appears over and over again. Let me just read two or three of these. Psalm 83:3. Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Psalm 72. The king is required to defend the cause of the poor, give deliverance to the needy. God delivers, that's the same word. The needy and the poor who have no helper. Amos 5:25. Let justice flow down like water and righteousness, same word, like an ever-flowing stream. Micah 6:8. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God. Jeremiah 22:3. Thus says the Lord, act with justice and deliver from the hand of the oppressor anyone who has been robbed. Now that theme is the central theme of the Old Testament. Now the Old Testament changed course, by the way. If you start out reading the Bible, I've got people to read the Bible, don't ever start them in Genesis. because from Genesis through the Pentateuch, through Kings and Chronicles, it's one goddamn slaughter after another. It's a bloody 150 pages. Somebody's always getting off, and most often it's that God says to do this. And it's not until you begin to come into another tradition that you get these justice things. And finally, the prophets raise this issue. So in the Jewish tradition, you've got these two streams. You've got God the avenger, God the punisher, God the judge, and you've got God the justifier, or the just maker. And Jesus had to decide which stream he was going to go with. And he decided right early, right at the beginning of his ministry, which one he was going to take. And this is outlined in Luke 4, in his sermon at his home synagogue Nazareth, where he quotes Isaiah, who is one of these justifier people. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, release to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, liberty to the oppressed, and proclaim that this is the year it's going to happen. That is the year of Jubilee. That, my friend, is a political agenda. And that political agenda is set over against the Roman occupation. That's where it comes from. And everybody said, because this young man got up preaching in his own synagogue, like every young man gets up and preaches in his own church for the first time, wasn't he nice? Doesn't he have a good voice? He looks so well. That's our little Jesus who grew up down the street down there. You know, Mary and Joseph, that's their kid. Isn't he a sweetheart? And then Jesus sits down. That doesn't mean he's done, because in the synagogue, when the preacher sat down, it meant he was going to preach. He hadn't done the sermon yet, he just read the text. And he gives two illustrations. One about a widow who was a foreigner that a prophet took care of. A foreigner. Unjustly treated by the Jews. The second illustration was the healing of an officer in a foreign army who was not a Jew. And they wanted to throw him over the cliff. But Jesus took sides then. Because Jesus' entire ministry was set in this context of justice. Now, if we are going to be faithful to the ministry of Jesus, then our fundamental concern has got to be justice. It's got to be it. We don't have any other message. It's not a matter of getting our soul saved. It's not a matter of being right under the law. It's a matter of being just. And that is not something that happens to us, that's something that we happen. We are just makers. So our role in culture is to take all these divisions, all these inequalities, and justify them. That is, bring them into some kind of harmonious, equal relationship. And that's the task not only of the church, but of all Christian people. Now, we've done pretty well at that. If you take a look at our history, every time there has been a movement for the good of people, it has been staffed basically by folk who are either church people or who cut their teeth in the church. That's where it's come from. I deal with a lot of people who say, I'm a secularist. I don't believe in all this religious crap. I just want to do the right thing. Well, I get to talking with them, you know. Well, where'd you grow up? Oh, they grew up in a Christian home, or a Jewish home, or a Muslim home. Where'd you grow up? You went to Sunday school, learned Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world, some Sunday school. And then got a belly full of the church that didn't want to do anything about what they knew to be true and left. So we have to make common cause with those people who are no longer part of the church for very good reasons. I mean, if I wasn't so conditioned, I probably wouldn't be part of it either. But when we have combined with those people and used church people, church money, for justifying things, we've done very well. Any of you seen the movie about Wilberforce yet?
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace, right? Yeah, well, how'd you like it?
It was wonderful.
Powerful movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. You get this right out of his Christian identity. The civil rights movement, the anti-slavery movement here came out of a Christian identity. That was man-staffed, women paid for by the church. We forget that Martin Luther King Jr. was fundamentally a churchman. And the whole Montgomery bit was formed out of the church. There were church people that went into the South to violate the law down there to win that victory. In South Africa, it was Desmond Tutu and the church. Nelson Mandela grew up in a mission school that produced that. The rights of labor in this country, if you go back and read its history, generated fundamentally by religious people. The care of the poor, the New Deal, all were influenced and paid for and backed basically by church people. So when we've gotten this message of justification, when we understand what it is to be just, not to bring to justice, but to justify, to make equal those things which are unequal, we have a pretty good record. Except that's only half the story, as you know. We also have a pretty poor record. When the church has been a major force, when it has been the center of culture, when it has been very powerful and got everybody in, it has gone sour. In the American antebellum South, the antebellum South was run by the Baptist and Methodist Church. That's how segregation, later Jim Crow, got its power. In South Africa, it was the Dutch Reformed Church that maintained apartheid. It has been the church, when it has been powerful and in charge and dominant in culture, that every single time has sided with the fascists. Every single time. So when we hear today that the mainline church is no longer in the center of things, it's kind of marginalized, I say hooray. That's an advantage. The prophets of the Old Testament operated from the margin, not from the center. They were not the prophets of the king. Jesus operated from the margins, not the center. He was a Galilean outcast, not part of the establishment. And today, the greatest opportunity the progressive church has is that it is not in the center. It has been decentered. Now we talk about us losing all our power, thank God. Because it is always the powerless that provide the hope. I was listening the other night to the Jim Lehrer news. And one of his colleagues was in Europe looking at churches. And Lehrer says to him, "What's going on in the European churches? It's different than here." He says, "Very interesting." Say, here, the more people go to church, the more conservative they are. Did anybody see this? In Europe, the less people go to church, the more liberal they are. And if they really begin to go to church again, they become even more liberal. Why? Because now in Europe, the church is way on the margins. Hardly anybody is part of it. but it's those who are still part of it who make the progressive move in Europe valuable. It was a little Lutheran church that took the lead in what finally brought down the Berlin Wall. That little Lutheran church had demonstrations for months every night. Just a small group of people that got the attention. It wasn't Ronald Reagan that brought down the wall. It wasn't Mark Borg who brought down the wall. It started with a group of Lutheran people over there. So the fact that we are marginalized, I go around, I talk to ministers' groups all the time. I teach in the seminary, and I listen to the poor ministers gripe about how bad things are. And they don't see that as an advantage. They're no longer, the conservative right-wing religionists are bought and paid for by the government. They are literally on the government payroll. Because they think now we've got the power and we've got the people. That's god-awful.
Faith-based initiative.
Hmm?
Faith-based initiative.
Faith-based initiative, sure. Sure. We've got in Southern California a whole line of big African-American churches that used to be progressive. But now they've got hundreds of thousands of dollars from the government. And they're no longer progressive. So the fact that we're on the margins is an advantage. Now that's when you talk to ministers, they don't believe that. They don't believe that. Because ministers have a problem. I say, how many of you, any clergy here? Good. But you don't get most ministers out there like this. Why? A, they're so busy. Oh, they're busy. I was 20 years minister of a fairly large church in Missouri before I retired and went teaching seminary in Australia. And when I went there, I told this congregation, I'm going to do three things. I'm going to take care of you. If you've got trouble, if you're sick, if you've got death in the, whatever you need, I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to take care of you. That's the first thing I'm going to do. Second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to be your resident theologian. And I would spend 4 or 5 classes a week and ran everybody through a 3-year program of teaching. I did one first year in Christian Scripture, second year in Hebrew Scriptures, third year in basic theology, and I couldn't find a book on that, so I wrote one called Building a Biblical Faith, still used a lot. That's the second thing I'm going to be your teacher. And that includes what I do Sunday morning. Third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take you out of this place into the community and introduce you to the world. That's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to go to committee meetings. I'm not going to go to board meetings. I'm not going to do women's groups or Sunday schools or men's groups or youth groups. I'm not going to do any of that. If you want any of that done, you do it. I'm not going to do it. And that happened for 20 years. Well, they had a pretty good program, but I didn't do it. They had a lot of committees going, but I didn't go to them. I did those 3 things because my fundamental ministry was justice. Now, you talk to a lot of clergy these days, and they say, "Well, I'd like to do these things, but I got this great variety of people here, and I can't afford to lose another member. And if I say anything about any of this, I'll lose another bunch, and we're on the edge now. And we can't even pay our, Oh God, I get tired of that. I gave a lecture to a group of ministers, younger guys, mostly ladies, a while back, and all they could talk about was how they were burned out. And I listened to that for about 2 days. And I finally looked at them and said, "Folks, I know you spent a lot of hours, and some of you say you're burned out, but I know a little bit about what you do, and I don't say I can be burned out. You've never even been warm. Never even been warm." But ministers say they can't be involved in any of this justice stuff because they'd lose people if they did. Well, the way they justify themselves is by compassion. Now, we're pretty good at compassion. We do pretty well about compassion. We don't do near as well as the fundamentalists, by the way. I spend a lot of time with fundamentalist pastors in some of these big mega churches. And if you take a look at our congregations, they tend to be white and middle class. If you take a look at the congregations of some of these big fundamentalist mega churches, they're very mixed. They do a lot better with the nobodies than we do in terms of compassion. They really do. Take it very seriously. Not everybody, but a lot of compassion. So we talk to ministers of the mainline churches, and they tell us all about their compassion ministries. In St. Joseph, where I was, we had a group of churches that ran all these things. One of the things we ran was a food kitchen. So 3 or 4 of us said, we need to serve hungry people in this community. So we operated a lunch place where people could come and have lunch just because they were hungry. That's all. You didn't need anything. You didn't get any lecture. You didn't get any sermon, no Bible tract. You just got food. And we began by serving 30 or 40 people a day. Well, in 2 years, we were serving 300 or 400 people a day. Now, I can tell you, raising money to feed people is a piece of cake. You can raise, we bought our own building, we had our own staff. You can raise any money you want to feed people. And so every year, those of us who did this would have a dinner at the big hotel honoring ourselves for all the good things we were doing about feeding people. And whoever was chairman that year would make the same damn speech. She would say, or he would say, this year we served 300 people a day. It's 365 days a year. Next year we ought to serve 400. And being the originator of the thing, I would always make the next speech. And I would say, I don't understand that. Maybe next year we ought to serve nobody. Because the question is, why in this prosperous community are there 300 or 400 hungry people? That is a political problem. How do we move the church? Compassion is important. We've got to do those things. We had that feeding program. We had a whole square block of frozen food and cold storage lockers that somebody gave us for $1. And we served all the food pantries in a 2-state area in Missouri and Kansas. Every food pantry got their stuff from us. We took over an old Catholic rectory, and we had a home for girls who were pregnant who'd been thrown out of their own houses. We ran a clergy consultation service on problem pregnancies. We had a homeless shelter. The YWCA across the street where girls used to come in residence had 3 floors vacant. We bought those 3 floors for $1 or leased them for $1 a year. And we had a home for abused women and their kids. And I went to the chief judge of the juvenile court and said, look, don't put these men in jail that beat these women up, give them to me. And we'll run through a 6-month course in abuse. And if they're still abusing after that, then you can put them in jail. Well, our recidivism rate was very low. We did all those things. And they're all compassion. We built houses with Habitat for Humanity with our own hands. Did all those things. But that does not address the hard justice problem. Now, how do we move with compassion, through compassion, to justice? That's the issue. The church is very good about compassion. It is not that good about justice. How do we? Because people will say, justice is a political problem. If you're going to solve these problems, you're going to have to get involved in politics. Right now, let me tell you a little bit about what I do, other than teach. I'm on the staff of something called Progressive Christians Uniting. That's the rally we had Sunday night. Progressive Christians Uniting are people who are on the left wing of all our churches. That realize their congregations aren't going to do any of this, but we can give them a way to do it. or the ex-church people who are out there by the skillions, who've given up on the church, realize that here are Christian people, progressive people going to do something, and they're part of our constituency. One of the things we're now working on are 2 bills before the California State Legislature. They're already filed bills. One of them is to refund a program of treatment and education for non-violent drug offenders. We got people locked up by the tens of thousands in Missouri on drug charges, and that's not going to solve the problem of sticking them in jail. For 2 years, we had a program of education for these people, not incarceration, but therapy and training and education. Highly successful. And then we got a Republican actor who became governor and cut it out. I won't name him. He's also not too bad a fellow in some ways, Schwarzenegger. Oh, I did name him. So that's legislation. We're working on that. We're going to get that bill passed. Second thing we're working on, which is one of my principal things, is we've got a bill up on marriage rights or legal rights of gay and lesbian people. We have a sponsor of the bill. We're going to get that bill passed, and we're going to have some relief on this whole issue in California. Now, friends, they're justice issues. They're justice issues. You got to feed the hungry, but you got to find out why they're hungry. Remember Don Helder Camara, who was Bishop of Recife, Brazil, Catholic bishop, who said, I can spend all day pulling people out of the river, but sooner or later, I've got to go up the river and see who is throwing them in. Now, that's the religious task. The religious task is to find those places of inequity. The opposite of justice is injustice, by the way. Our task is to find those areas in culture where people are discriminated against, put down, troubled. Excuse me. I got it. And find remedies to those situations. That's our task. So the fundamental task of a Christian who understands the gospel is justice. Now, how do we get in touch with these things? Well, some people can get in touch with them through their congregation. Excuse me. My experience is not many. Most congregations are scared to death to do this stuff. So we have got to find extra church institutions which pay attention to the gospel and which don't divorce themselves from the church, but which are parachurch. In our own denomination, a few years ago, our whole division of social justice, to call the Church and Society, was fired, closed out, given away for financial reasons. So a group of us began something called Disciple Justice Action Network. How many of you are members of DJAN? Yeah, several of you. Well, those who were disciples who are not members of DJAN, you ought to join it. DJAN is doing this on behalf of the church, but it is concerned about justice. It's concerned about justice and abortion rights. It's concerned about justice for gay and lesbian people. It's concerned about racial justice, which is still going on. It's concerned about the most important issue right now, and that is world peace, Iraq. That's what it's concerned about. Now, to try to get congregations to do that is just almost impossible. And so, so my advice to you, if your congregation won't do it, get out of the church not out of it, but get on the edge of it, and find a group of people who will do it. And go with them. Sometimes you just have to change churches. Sometimes you just can't stay where you are. Now that's a hard thing to tell people, but that's true. But if you are committed to justice, you've got to find ways to do it. Now, one of my perpetual concerns, and I'll finish up with this, is I live in a community with 5 colleges, fairly elite colleges, a graduate university with a big Department of Theology and Religious Studies, and a big Methodist seminary. We had a meeting the other night of 450 people in the middle of this college community. You know how many students we had out of that group? And when we advertised this up the kazoo? 12. I've been through the Vietnam days, and I was a chaplain to students at the University of Chicago. And we would have a student body, we'd have 4, 5, 6, 700 people, and we'd get them in that church building, and I'd always say, "Welcome to the police," because they always were there. I was the chaplain of the Chicago 8, most of whom cut their teeth in some religious community, by the way. And I was called before the grand, when they were indicted, sentenced, I was called before the grand jury as an unindicted co-conspirator. And you go into a grand jury, you've got no defense, you've got no attorney, you cannot question your accusers, you're just a piece of meat. And the 2 people there to testify against me were 2 college members of my youth group who were employed by the FBI. I have been except from Chicago, I have been significantly unable to get the attention of students. When all these students live right around our churches there in Chicago, why? The difference between now and Vietnam is the draft. The draft got their attention. I was tear gassed at the corner of Michigan and Balboa with thousands of students. Now, I've talked to some people, not only around this campus, Jan, but lots of other places. And what I get is, well, students are busy, and they're this and they're that, and they're not interested in these things. And the church really hasn't said anything exciting enough to get their attention, and there's no draft. Well, I don't know the answer to that problem. I know we're going to continue to work at it, and we've just put somebody on our staff to work full-time with just students. That's it. And right now, he has 10 campuses this week, 10 campuses with 250 undergraduate students who 1 week ago, on Friday night, began a total fast except for water. And they will conclude with a light supper, because you can't eat much after a week's fast, this Friday night after dark. And I've got to get back to help them celebrate it. Now, you get that many students who interrelate on issues and get them together for a week with no food, and you don't have the same group of students you had at the end of it than you had at the beginning. Or the other thing that we've done is get students to the First Christian Church in Tucson that has a program to put water out on the desert called Humane Borders. So that when people come across the desert, the migrants come across the desert, they do not die, as scores of them do every year, of thirst. So we go out there with these trucks to supply water for all these. You get a bunch of kids, I'm talking about high school kids, on that kind of a trip, to go out and see what's going on in the desert, bring order to people, they'll never be the same. Never be the same. The best thing a church can do is a mission trip with their students. Now, how you get the attention of college people, you know, I'm much more acquainted with that than I am. I've not had good success in that where I am now. Well, I've been there 5 years and I've been working at it, but not much of a success. Those are the things that get the attention of people. I've been down the week before Thanksgiving to Georgia, to the School of the Americas. Any of you been there? The School of Americas? Get 20 to 25,000 people down there, most of them under the age of 25. Most of them, because the Catholic high schools and the Catholic colleges turn them out by the busloads. And there are 3 wire fences between where you're able to march and the fort. And every year there are people that find a way to get under the fence or over the fence. This year I think there were 17 across the fence. One of them was the minister of University Church in Chicago, where I used to be pastor, Don Coleman. Don Coleman. And Don Coleman's statement that he made to the judge, he was sentenced in 3 months in prison.
2 months.
2 months, is it 2 months?
Starting
It's out on the
in
table. Starting
April 17th.
now. If you want to change the life of people, get them down to the School of Americas where they train assassins for Latin America. Where I live, we've got a number of retired missionaries from Latin America who know firsthand what the right-wing people do in Latin America who are trained at the School of, it's not called the School of Americas anymore, it's called something else. Let me see if I can find what it's called now.
WINSEC.
It's called the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. The Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation. School of Assassins. Get some people down there with that. Because my experience is to try to get students in seminars and talk to them and try to get them organized for something. Doesn't work. Although I think there are a number of students here. Get these trips organized to these places where they're out on a limb, where they've gone far beyond where they thought they could go. My function in ministry as a pastor always took the congregation beyond where it was ready to go. When people say, oh, we can't do that, I say, yes, we can, we're going to do it. So always you were out ahead. But when you got out so far ahead that nobody could hear you anymore, then you were too far. So you operated in that area in between where people didn't want to go and where they couldn't hear you. But then you yourself went even beyond that. During the Vietnam bit, for 3 years I didn't pay my taxes. I paid half of it. Every quarter I write a letter to the federal government saying, I'm not paying for this war. I'm not going to do it. You can do what you want. So they sent me letters, and they sent me nastier letters. And then they sent me real nasty letters. Then they'd send some nice people, and then they'd send some not so nice people. Now they send some people that said, okay, we're going to indict you and put you in jail. I said, well, I'm going to do what I'm got to do. You're going to do what you got to do, and I guess that's a good deal. And I would take the money, and then I violated the law again because I made up a Social Security number, just made it up. I knew what the sequence was, just made it up. Had an assumed name, and in a savings and loan association outside of the city, I would deposit this money and use it for peace purposes. Well, after all these threats, I went out there one day I forget whether I was going to put money in or take it out. And the bank manager said, I got to talk to you. He said, this account has been seized by Internal Revenue and it's closed. And that's the last I heard of him. they got about $1 out of 10 that I owed them. But that was small potatoes for them, so they dismissed it. How did they know about my false Social Security number and my fake name? I'm sure that in the inner circle of students with whom I worked, there was a spy. I knew that. We always had spies at all of our meetings. Now, when you talk to a congregation about the fact that everybody that comes into their building is going to have their picture taken from a camera in a university building across the street, that's heavy. That congregation was able to say, okay, if that's what we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. But that was an unusual congregation. Most congregations won't do that, but the task of the leaders of the church is always to take the congregation beyond where it's comfortable with. But then realize where they can't hear you anymore, and then you personally go beyond that. And I think that's a winning strategy. At least it's a strategy I think that and the various mission trips that we do, getting people out of their comfort zone, is a winning sort of a thing. Getting them out of their congregation to these marginal groups is a winning sort of a thing. But I'd be interested now to hear what kind of strategies, how you respond to this, by the way, but basically hear what kind of strategies you think are useful in moving people to justice, because justice being the core value of the Judeo-Christian tradition. What do we do to move people to that level where they understand the gospel in terms of justice and act on it? What do you do? What's your experience? Yeah.
I think a lot of innovative things happen on the fringe. I think you need to give students time to have a regular studentship, but they have to have time to be involved in the sort of thing you're talking about. They have to have time to learn what you're talking about.
How do they do that?
Then, well, you give them time by taking. They might take 5 years to go through it. They might take 4 years to go through it. They might not even go through it all. They might just change their field, but they have to have something which pays their food. They have to survive. And I think the university can do that. Whether it doesn't matter whether, I'm going to a seminar on cybernetics tomorrow, and some of that started on the fringe.
Sure.
It starts in Beckman up the road here. And so you have to encourage the university to encourage its fringe.
We have a program in something called the Disciples Peace Fellowship, which is one of the units of our Disciples Destination. The Disciples Peace Fellowship, every year we employ a half a dozen college students for the summer to go around and spend the summer at a variety of youth camps and high school camps and conferences. And they come back different. So that's giving them a way to live through the summer, a way to make some money to go back to school, and an experience where they've got to take some leadership about these things. And if you track, was your daughter ever one of those interns? No? When you track what happens to those students after they come back from a summer event, they're different. But you're right. We've got to give them the space. We've got to give them the time. And we've got to allow them to sustain themselves. That's all right, but we've got to keep the pressure on.
So this university has, out of 35,000 students, they have 30 that do independent study programs where they write their own degree programs.
Yeah.
And it's lousy in the sense that there's a biochemist looking over, and there's they're all looking over to see that no one will infringe their sacred territory. And we desperately need more than that. And that program has been in jeopardy of being closed out.
Well, that's the nature of large academic institutions where you get the jealousy by department. Yes.
So Becky was not a DPF intern, but she did have an opportunity to do a 9 or 10-month program under the Division of Overseas Ministries that was called Oikos.
Mm-hmm.
And it was international and had young people from Germany and Canada and the Philippines in those 4 countries for that period. And it was an amazing experience for her and really called her into ministry, or confirmed her call into ministry.
We have students that we take for the summer, or they take off a year. And we'll send them overseas somewhere to the toughest places. I've got a good friend right now who's in a slum in India. She graduated from college in May. Before she goes to graduate school, she's working in India. I get letters from her. She's going to be amazing. Let me tell you my experience about that. I grew up in a very conservative church. I was a member of Youth for Christ. I went to Phillips University, which was a kind of a nice, quiet, conservative church college. I went in, when I left there and graduated from seminary in 1955, I went to a church in Washington, D.C., and my goal was to build the biggest disciple church in the Brotherhood. I was going to do it. By golly, I was going to do it. I was going to do it right there in Washington. And a young church executive named Thomas J. Liggett, who's now across the street neighbor from mine, came to visit me. And he said to himself, "You've got to be converted." And I started out, I had one Sunday, the first year I was there in this little church, I had 126 new members in one Sunday. I had no idea who they were. I was out with an evangelist, and we had a goal of 124. We had 122. I was out with an evangelist the night before. We said, "We got to get two more. I got to get two more." So we went knocking on doors and apartments without any luck until he finally said, "I'm going to change the tactics." So he knocks on this door, guy opens it. He says, "We're here making a survey. We are against communism." Are you? This was 1956. "Are you against communism?" "Oh yeah, yeah. "Then you must be for Jesus." "You for Jesus?" "Oh yeah, yeah. Sign here." 4 more. 126. Piece of cake. They showed up that Sunday. That was the last time I ever saw them. But TJ thinks I'm going to do 2 things for you. First, I'm going to put somebody in your congregation who's going to convert you. So he put in my congregation in Washington, D.C., a member of Congress named Edith Green from Portland, Oregon, who became one of my best friends. While I was a marvelous woman. In Portland, Oregon, the big downtown federal building is now the Edith Green building. She died about 3-4 years ago. Great woman. So the second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to take you out of this place. I'm going to take you to South America, Latin America. Actually, I went for 2 weeks with TJ to Latin America, spent some time in Mexico looking at what they call the burned out revolution, and then to the Dominican Republic where a war was going on. We were picked up at the airport by the ambassador, and because the war was going on. And then we went to Haiti. And in Haiti, we spent the first 4 days in Haiti in the slums of Port-au-Prince. It was God, awful experience. I'd never been. I grew up in the main line in Philadelphia. I never saw anything like that in Haiti. Poorest place in the Western Hemisphere, by far. Well, after 3 or 4 days of that, there were about 10 of them, we'd had enough poverty. I can tell you for sure. I mean, you get in a pallet and pick the bugs off. Nothing to eat. So T.J. Liggett took us up to a hotel, up on a mountain, outside of Port-au-Prince. 4-star hotel. To escape the poverty that we just experienced. And we were having dinner on the veranda of the hotel. The musician group playing music. And I remember I was sitting right on the edge of this porch, overlooking the city, with the curtain goes off in the water, and the dogs and the smoke and the drums down below, all that poverty down there, which you couldn't really see. Now it just sounded quaint. And I remember I was having a fish stuffed with lobster and fine wine from somewhere and tropical fruit. I was in hot. around the perimeter of the hotel lawn, there was an iron fence for our protection. As I was sitting eating this meal, a woman who was so emaciated that she was able to go through the wires and crawl on the lawn, crawl around to just below where I was sitting. And she stood up and handed me her dying child. Well, first thing I tried to do was give her my plate. Couldn't do that. Because by that time, I couldn't take the child, you know, my God, what was I going to do? By that time, the hotel manager, who was watching all this, comes running out. 2 guards come running out, haul her off. He comes to me and apologizes and says, I hope she hasn't ruined your dinner. You know, that woman has been ruining my dinners for 40 years. I can't get by that kind of experience. And T.J. Liggett says, I'm going to convert you. You're worthwhile. I'm going to put somebody in your congregation. I'm going to take you somewhere. How do we get out of our cocoons into the world to understand the call of the gospel for justice? That's what the church is all about. And that's the way we've got to get hold of people in their formative years. I mean, I'm 77. I retired 3 times. I can't quite get it done. But I am passionate about getting out of the way and introducing some young people to the world. That's what I've got to do.
Well, I work for this organization called Champaign County Healthcare Consumers locally that does community organizing for healthcare access and healthcare justice. And so this isn't faith-based, but we just do, you know, we're clear about our, you know, social justice and social change mission around healthcare. And we're actually able to engage people anywhere from high school age into their 90s, you know, to work on different issues. And I think a lot of people want to do something, but they just don't necessarily know how to make a difference or how to make a change. And one of the interesting things that we found was that a lot of times when we're trying to organize and we try to, you know, because you build your power by having more and more people. That's how you build your power, you know, when you're trying to make social change. And so one of the most challenging things that we've had actually is dealing with congregations. And I have an example of a few years ago, we were having a struggle with a local hospital up the road that had ended a program for low-income seniors that helped them afford their hospital care. And the people in the program were overwhelmingly, well, they were low income, many African American, and we were organizing with the people and trying to figure out how to make the hospital change their decision. And the people decided that they wanted to have a prayer vigil outside of the hospital. And you know, they said, we'll talk to our pastors, you know, to come to the prayer vigil and so on. Well, we found out actually that the people who were members of these different congregations were getting resistance, like what you're talking about, getting resistance inside the church from their pastors. And so we actually had to do another level of organizing where we had to work with the people who were members of these congregations to get their fellow congregants to sort of put the pressure on the pastors to come and speak and to be part of this, you know, prayer vigil. And they did come. But I remember one pastor, you know, saying to me, the only reason I'm here is because my congregation made me be here.
Oh, good for them.
you know, and so, there was sort of like organizing inside the organizing for the churches. And, you know, what we found over and over again in our experience, you know, in this community, is that, you know, there are people who are definitely, moved to justice, they have a faith basis for it, but that when they try to, you know, when they try to bring along, you know, or get solidarity within their church, there is tremendous resistance. And that's not an answer to your question. I mean, I feel like, you know, my organization and our work, we get to move people all the time to get, you know, to become involved in social justice work, you know, in a lasting kind of way so that they're part of social change. But I think people are hungry, you know, the ones who feel like their church ought to be part of it. You know, I think they're disappointed when they try to, you know, get support from their church and move their
Oh,
church.
definitely. My guess is a lot of people you work with really generated their ethic out of their religious background, even though they said screw it because it doesn't do anything. Yeah. Let me list a few of the things that come to my mind as the areas that need the attention of people concerned about justice. Number one, these are not in rank order, these are just thought about them. Universal health care. One of these days, the United States will realize what every other advanced nation in the world has long since known: a single-payer national system is the only way to provide equitable care for everyone. I've talked to too many seniors. During the last presidential election, I spent a month working on a campaign. I'm a member of the Democratic Committee. No politics. They have their head somewhere else. And I would go around and talk to old people in Missouri. The thing I heard most often is they really had to decide between food and medicine. That's a decision. I'm not going to make that decision. But these people do. That's a justice issue. Two, as long as gays and lesbians are treated unfairly under the law, there is no justice for them. Three, the environment. Maybe this ought to be one. If you've not shown Al Gore's film, why not? And if you are not lobbying your Congress, your state legislature, your city government, why not? Now, some of us do little things. I mean, I've changed all the light bulbs in my house with these low energy things. I drive a hybrid car, and I'm proud of it. Nuts, that's not. This is a systemic problem. As captain of the oil companies, which is what Iraq's about. By the way, the Iraq War, I have a sense in which the United States government, the administration has won. The war has been won by the right wing. Because despite all the rhetoric, it wasn't about weapons of mass destruction. It was about two things. Oil. 3 weeks ago, the Iraqi government divided the oil. 85% of the oil goes to American and British corporations. 15% remains with Iraqi corporations. They got it. That's what they wanted. Second thing is the right to control the Near East by building permanent air bases in Iraq. We've got 7 of them that are not going to leave. The 2 things they set out to do to win the war, they've done. They've won it. And now it's just a matter of finding a way to get out. Okay. But the hybrid car, about all. The hybrid car is peanuts. That doesn't work. You know, that's nothing. Although I do say to people, how much mileage do I get? I say, well, every 3 weeks I got to stop and dump something out. When I was in Phillips, I had a friend named James Clayton Pippin. Did you know Jim Pippin? He was fairly wealthy. And he bought himself a new Fraser car. There was only a few hundred of them produced. And he would talk about his gas mileage. Oh, he got great gas. Back then it was 10 miles a gallon. What he didn't know was that a couple of us would sneak in his garage every night and dump some gas in the tank. So his miles got better and better and better. We just never heard the end of it. That went on for about 3 weeks. He'd brag it, and then we would begin to slip into his garage at night and siphon some out. And his gas mileage went down and down and down and down. He took the car back to the shop, couldn't find what was wrong with it. Finally, we broke down and told him. Anyway, driving hybrid cars, which we all do anyhow, is peanuts. 4, a living wage. For the average CEO to make 3,000 times what the line worker makes is unjust. The differential has expanded 900% in the last decade. The rich just get richer and the poor more numerous. That's a justice issue, and we're not going to solve that by charity. That's a systemic issue, and justice has to do with systems. 5, luring migrants here over the border to take jobs our own people supposedly will not take, calling here with our siren songs of jobs, and then treating them like we do, is obscene. You get these people, and we got folks all down there saying, we got jobs for you in the fields and in the valley. We got jobs for you in Peoria. We got jobs for you in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Come on over. And then we call them criminals when they get there. That's obscene. Ending the war. That right now is top of my list. And I'm sick to death of going to meetings and talking to liberals who got 2 lines. Ain't it a shame? And aren't they terrible? That's not going to do it. We ended the Vietnam War. But we had to have the students to do it all over the world. When you get radical groups that challenge the power structure, it is led by students. That's not happening. And one of my serious questions is how that corner is going to get turned. I don't know. But every time I go to a college community, I ask that, and people I talk to don't know either. But sooner or later, institution of the draft will do it. And if we go into it, I don't see how we can get by without a draft if we go into Iran. We now have 2 battleships, 2 aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf. I think this business of capturing these English sailors is a setup. I think we have plans to go into Iran from the air, not ground troops. If we get into another major war, they cannot sustain the armed forces of this country without a draft. Gotta have it. From our point of view, that's the best thing that could happen. But I don't see students being mobilized without it. Well, that's my little list. Now there's a bunch of other things on it. But my only advice for folks is if your church is not getting in these things, for Christ's sake, find the group it is. For the gospel is about justice. So what are your ideas? What more? Yeah.
I have a question. Is there a publication that you would point to as a good resource? I read Sojourners, but it's and it
Sojourners
has
is
great stuff. But it is, an evangelical group. Is there a progressive
Yes,
alternative?
there's a magazine called Progressive something. I tell you what, I put out a blog. It's not quite a blog. It's a newsletter I put out every other week. And if you write your email address for me, if your email address is written enough so I can understand, I got lots of email addresses I need to read, so you gotta get an email address exactly right. And the post office, you could miss a letter and the post office will send you a letter, but email won't. And you'll get something with my email on it. Correspond to me by email and I will send you that magazine. It's called the Christian Progressive somewhere, I forget, I get it, it's out of Boston. There are units like mine all over the country, by the way. and yet we haven't found a way to network.
Yeah, that's my frustration.
That's my frustration.
As I read a lot, we are somewhat involved in politics, trying to be more. I'm
Yeah.
part of a congregation that is actually open to a lot of these issues and working on them.
What is your congregation?
I'm at St. Matthew Lutheran in Urbana.
Uh-huh. Well, the Lutheran Church, here and there,
Yeah,
has been in the forefront of this sort of
Yeah.
thing, and here and there, they've been in the background.
yeah, yeah. But
But
we're
like the
sort
rest
of
of us.
looking for something, a vehicle to, where people are talking together more, and I'm just not finding that.
I talked to our executive director about coming out here and seeing if I could get enough people to start a chapter out here. He said, don't do it, because there's a group in Chicago that does the same thing, and we can't invade their turf. Now, I don't remember the name of this group. I've talked to the executive director up there, he's a grand fellow, and they're very much involved in legislation in the state.
Would that be Protestants for the Common Good?
That's it, Protestants for the Common Good.
Yeah, excellent.
It is super
Excellent
group.
organization, yeah.
And I spent the evening, we had a dinner. You know, sometimes you gotta get into the deep pockets of people who've got some resources, who are old liberals, who haven't forgotten what they understood, even though they're no longer, will get out and do it. We had a dinner at the Hilton Hotel in Pasadena a month ago with Marcus Borg and Tom Hayden. Tom Hayden's gonna be here Friday night. Go hear him. Gonna be in this campus Friday night. Go hear him. He is super, stupendous. Hope he gives the same talk he gave us. We had 550 people at $95 a shot. We made $30,000 on that dinner. You can't tell me there's nobody around like this. But people don't know it. I play a little golf. Not near as much as I like. I get out 6:30 in the morning, twice a week, play 9 holes, have breakfast with some buddies, and go back to work. We're done at 9 o'clock. Well, I was out there by myself because one of my buddies broke his leg and the other one was doing something else, so I was by myself. And I ran into these two businessmen. And they said, what do you do? I said, well, I'm a liberal progressive Christian, and I work to organize progressive Christians in this community. No, I'm not saying that. They said, there aren't any progressive Christians. There aren't any. I said, well, what Christians do you know that are prominent? They said, well, Jerry Falwell,
Oh, no.
Dobson, and Pat Robertson. Who are your leaders? Oh, Marcus Borg, Peter Marmon. Who the hell are they? Never heard of them. These guys didn't realize, these guys, and I think most people, believe all Christians are fundamentalist right-wingers. That's what they believe Christians are. If you look at the media, that's what Christians are. Oh, is it a Christian perspective? What's that mean? That means right wing. Now, we haven't done a very good job in making ourselves, that's why when we do things in our community, we always do an outdoor something or other that says, no, there are a lot of us around. And we can get 550 people for $95 a head at a liberal religious rally. If I can get 2 nights ago, Sunday night, 3 nights ago, 450 people out, just in our little community. Don't tell me there are none of us around. But we're scared to death to say anything that's going to get anybody's attention, or to do anything. So this business, when I say that anybody that's read the gospel understands it enough to get off their rear end and function, is the hope. Who else? What do you boys and girls in the back think? Yes.
Are you familiar with a group called Sacred Activism?
Who? Sacred?
Sacred Activism.
No, I'm not.
It's headed up out of Wisdom University. Matthew Fox.
Oh, yes,
and,
yes, yes.
Father Richard Rohr.
Yep.
People like that. I've been hearing a lot about it on the email, and it seems to be very hopeful. I just wondered if
Are you Catholic?
Catholic, Christian, ecumenical.
Well, I think one of the greatest hopes, by the way, is with Catholicism. Part of the group that worked with me, our Pax Christi group at our local parish, super people. We've got what I live in the community, retired Protestant church leaders. The three of our people are Catholic priests, including one of their leading national theologians, Rosemary Radford Ruther, who's the Catholic leader of the feminist movement, member of our community. So I have a great deal of hope in the left wing of the Catholic Church. Big deal. Be sure that somehow these people get in touch with that organization in Chicago. They are winners.
Yeah, you can just Google PFCG,
Do it.
Protestants for
Chicago.
Write it down.
Chicago's another world.
Yeah, that's not here. I understand that. But the issues are not another world. The issues are this world.
Some of them.
By the way, you gotta use a little moxie sometimes. I was telling a story to somebody today, I guess, that when I was in Chicago, I had occasion now and then to visit prisoners in the Cook County Jail. Now, the Cook County Jail is a zoo. You get an adult locked up in Cook County Jail for a year awaiting trial, which is what it takes up there to get a trial, regardless what the Bill of Rights is. And he's a criminal for life. So I ran into a 14-year-old kid in the Cook County Jail. What in the world is a 14-year-old kid doing in Cook County Jail? So I got to talking to him. He was a murderer. And there's something in the state of Illinois called the 703 procedure, which means that when the judge adjudicates the crime that this child committed as heinous, he can be transferred, or she, out of the juvenile system into the adult system. So you've got these kids in the adult system who are 13, 14 years old, cooked up with these criminals. I said something got to be done about it. So I said, what can we do? What can I do? I never said, we first said that. So I went to a printer, and I had printed up stationery, very elegantly done, embossed stationery with a nice logo on it, and my name as the Executive Director and CEO of the Cook County Commission on Juvenile Justice. Wasn't any such thing. Didn't exist, just me. But I also had a list of names, none of whom were recognizable because they were all fictitious. And I wrote the chief judge of the juvenile court and went to see him under the cover of this fake letter. And I said, Judge, we are the Citizens Committee on Juvenile Justice in Cook County. We want the right to sit in on all of these hearings where kids are transferred into the adult system, because they're all closed. They're not public hearings. So after a negotiation with him for a while, looking at my letter, he said, okay. So I got a group of people, and for a year, we sat in on every transfer hearing that the juvenile court had. Our notes. And then after a year, I got a couple of attorneys, and we sued the judge. And we sued Mayor Daley, and we sued the head of the Cook County Commission, and we sued the jailer, and we sued the director of prisons of Cook County in a class action suit on behalf of the kid I met and all the other kids like that, class action suit in federal court on a civil rights case. And we won. And Cook County had to build a separate facility for juveniles so that we're no longer in Cook County Jail. Now, is that dishonest? Was that false pretenses? Yes. Was that a violation of a number of laws? Yes. But sometimes you just have to do that. Now, I couldn't ask the congregation to be part of it. Because as liberal as that congregation was, that was beyond them. But I did it. And I guess some people say, Charles, you just didn't know better. I'm glad. I got a naive streak in me. It's 6 feet wide. Naive. People say you can't do wrong. Every now and then, we run into a kid out of that program. 2 of them are now attorneys, working on cases for kids. There's a lot of talk these days about thinking outside the box. But when you think outside the box, what you hit on the other edge of the box is the gospel. The gospel is always outside the box. Always outside the box. And that's why those of us who are on the margins have an extraordinary opportunity to do what you can't do when you're inside the box. Being the church. I'm not an ex-church person. I'm in the church. I'm committed to the church. But sometimes I feel like, I think it was Pope Leo the 13th who was asked, in the Middle Ages, was asked how he could stand the church. He said, it's like Noah's Ark. The only way to tolerate the stink inside is to know about the storm outside. And that's, I'm not going to give up on the church, but I'm going to find where its marginality is and call the marginalized to a new way to think. Tomorrow, and I think tomorrow, I guess most of you won't be there tomorrow, but tomorrow I'm going to talk about the church and where the church is now and what that whole thing is about. But tonight I want to do some other stuff.
I was just wondering if in your experience so far, if you've seen any church, you know, maybe with one of the pastors you've worked with or anything, move from that state of, you know, being worried about losing congregants and so on, to actually moving to the margin and doing work on the margins. Have you seen a church make that transition?
Seven.
Yeah.
Let me give you one example. Church of the Brethren, near us. Pietistic Germans. My wife and I now and then watch a Netflix. So we were watching the other day a Netflix called Jesus Camp. Ever heard of it? Ever seen Jesus Camp? It's pornographic. It's taking these 8 or 9-year-old kids and saying to them, the devil's going to get you, you're full of sin and evil. You need the blood of Jesus, you're a condemned sinner. And the kids, they take them off the camp and do this to them. And the kids are hysterical. And then you do a lot of other military things with them. Well, I was just, God, awful put off by that thing. Doing that to kids. Well, the next morning I was having breakfast with some of my buddies, and one of them was a woman who happens to be the minister of the Church of the Brethren. It used to be a very conservative, traditional German pietistic church. And she said, well, what we have begun to do is every year, instead of the old vacation Bible school, which you tell a bunch of kids a bunch of stories and get them to play, so what we do is every year we have a Jesus camp. Excuse me, didn't call it that. A peace camp. in which we teach kids, it's interfaith. We always have Jewish and Muslim kids there. For 2 years they've done it. It's interfaith. We teach them peace songs, we teach them peace scriptures, we teach them how to demonstrate peacefully. That's what we do, and they do it every evening for a week. Now, I know about that church. Something happened to that church with these German pietists, Church of the Brethren, that has been a traditional peace church, by the way. And my notion is next summer, not this year, I'm going to be on her staff this summer. I volunteered to be part of her staff. Next summer, I want to have in our community, which is a community of about 2 million people, 8 or 10 of these camps instead of vacation Bible schools. Now, there's a church that turned around. Another example. When I went to Washington after I got out of seminary to build this biggest church in the denomination, I took a church that had moved in order to get away from the blacks, the Negroes, they call them. And they sold their church to the Negroes and moved out to the end of the streetcar line. And took $150,000 to build this new big church they're going to build, away from the blacks. Well, they took a cost-plus contract, and the contractor skinned them. So when I got there was a basement with a wooden board over it, and a basement room about this size. And that was this big new church. Well, because I was able to add so many members, I built the whole thing. But we were still very careful that we stayed away from the Godman convention at Shepherd Park a couple of years ago at the convention. African American. The 2 leading churches for social justice among disciples in Washington, D.C. is that church and Michigan Presbyterian. Don't tell me churches can't change. But somebody, through the Holy Spirit, because it is God, by the way, that is the justifier. And we just follow along and do what God tells us to do about it. It is God who brings justice out of injustice. That's God's role. That's God's passion. That's God's passion. That's why the Old New Testament is full of it. That's God's passion. Somehow the Holy Spirit got a hold of some people in that church. Churches can change. But they don't unless the Holy Spirit gets a hold of somebody and begins to lead.
Yes.
Yes.
It's essential. We have to have a leader somewhere.
Absolutely.
And we have to train leaders.
Absolutely.
And they have to take on their own character.
People in church say, well, what can I do? I say, what are you doing? Well, I don't know. And then we sit and talk about what they do. So no, I'm not, the church is convertible. But not without people who are willing to think about the action of the Holy Spirit in the lives of people and become enthused enough with that they infiltrate. Remember Jesus talked about the leaven, the negative symbol. Leaven is subversive. Jesus never talked about the leaven and the lump as good things that, if you're just good enough, you'll love it. No. Leaven in the scripture is subversive. Subverts. We need some good subversives in our churches. We need to stir up trouble in our churches sometimes. That's what we've got to do. If you don't do that, nothing will happen. We Christians think, well, we just got to be nice. I gave up being nice when I was converted. So if you think just being nice is going to do it, you're wrong. Wise as serpents. Harmless as doves. Wise as serpents. That's why sometimes you have to not pay your tax, make a false social security number, and then sometimes you have to make a letterhead with a bunch of false stuff on it. That's subversive. I love subversive Christians. Who else? Yes.
Coming back to your question as far as how you can connect to students here in campus
Yeah.
and elsewhere. This was my experience.
Are you a student?
Yeah,
Yeah.
student. I had a lot of different like professors and stuff that are doing a lot of interesting things, and as I went through my freshman year, this is my junior year, you know, really started getting engaged as far as, I don't want to use the term activist, but like just being active and being socially conscious. And last year I had the opportunity to go out to New Orleans and do relief work, and that was a really big spark for me because there was leaders, there was like seniors that said this is interesting, this is important. They led that group, and then I went down as a sophomore, went down there, experienced that, went back there last summer, spent 2 months down there, and then just the past week I led a group of like 8 people down. You know?
Now you're the leader.
And then, you know, and then numerous people have done that, you know, within that core group of 40 people that went down last year. And I just think that it takes that development of leaders that meets the students' eye level. And it's not like having a professor or somebody like yourself coming in and telling us students what to do, or like, this is important. Like, that's not how you're gonna connect to me.
Right.
Like, connecting, meeting the students where they are. And like, that's what I'm worried about as far as like, how can students like myself, or like, I'm at the junior level, like, how can I go on to the next level? I'm just getting started.
You're
you know?
doing it.
Yeah, but like, I still like go to food pantries and such like that and see all these people, you know, and like going for charity, and I'm just like, I don't know, I'm looking for resources everywhere to try to form that solidarity with my fellow human being, and I'm just like, I just don't think there's enough resources out there. I'm still bumbling around, and I don't think the university level, at the university atmosphere necessarily fosters that as much as I would wish for.
Around the world it does.
Yeah.
Well, you led the group down in New Orleans?
Yeah.
I mean, that's transition, isn't it? I mean, you've gone from going down there with somebody to taking a group down. I've been to New Orleans, and you don't understand it until you're there, do you?
Yeah.
You cannot. Under what office do you go?
Under what office?
Auspices, yeah. Was there a
There's,
formal organization that?
yeah, there's grassroots, not-for-profit organization that started right after Katrina by Panther, Black Panther.
Yeah.
And so I worked with them all the time, so we worked with them this past week.
Where were you down there? Where did you go?
The upper Ninth Ward,
Upper Ninth?
just
the
over-
side of the bridge.
just the side of the bridge to the lower Ninth.
Yeah.
So,
How many of you been to New Orleans?
Not since Katrina.
Not since, well, since Katrina. Have you ever been there since? Go.
I was with her.
yeah.
Well, but not campus.
Well, I think in terms of, you know, I mean, you're looking to continue, how can you do social change or social justice work beyond, you know, this experience and what's the next level? And I think, you know, there are actually a lot of social change organizations. You know, Acorn has been very involved in the New Orleans stuff, but they do a lot of other things, and they're in a lot of different places. Locally, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers is a social change organization. We're connected to a whole network of organizations around the nation, some of them healthcare justice, others, you know, maybe more broadly social justice organizations. Illinois Disciples Foundation here is connected. There are organizations that you can connect with, and I think, you know, one of the problems that we have in this society is that we tend to, we're hyper-individualistic, so we highlight the role of one individual and act as if social change happened because of that one individual doing an extraordinary thing, like the way that we talk, for example, about Rosa Parks, you know, as if, and Michael Moore does this even, right? Michael Moore talks about Rosa Parks this way, that she just, you know, one day, you know, sat down on the bus and that this sparked, you know, the bus boycott. That's not true at all. She was part of, you know, an organizing effort that was massive. She, you know, and, you know, just one example locally, we've been working on, you know, hospital issues and the obligation of hospitals to provide charity care, and in our community, to stop incarcerating the poor people who couldn't pay their hospital bills. That happened in this community here. There was a Wall Street Journal story on the front page of the Wall Street Journal talking about our hospitals with photographs of community members who had been incarcerated. That was in October 30th, 2003. And it was a huge, huge article, and it rocked, you know, the nation in terms of the hospital industry and so on. But the way that that story was written was as if that reporter sort of discovered, you know, this heinous thing that these nonprofit hospitals were doing. The reason that reporter found the story was because she was connected to healthcare justice organizations that told her to come and talk to Champaign County healthcare consumers. The reason it was documented, the reason she was able to write her story and all the data in it to go up against the hospitals was because our organization did all that work, but we got written out. I mean, there was like a brief, you know, like literally like less than one sentence mentioned in a sidebar, you know, that sort of happened to mention my name and that I was the director of the organization. But we obscure social change organizations. We obscure the fact that, you know, they exist and that you can get connected with them.
Yeah.
And I'd say now that you're, you know you want to be dedicated to social change and not just charity, but change, you know, try to seek out social change organizations. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of times, you know, the church isn't necessarily helpful, you know, but you have some resources here in this room and in this community. And that's where I would encourage people to go with that.
But he's right, we do need leaders. I mean, if you haven't been a leader, unless they're leaders, it doesn't happen. The transition comes when we begin to say, well, I can be a leader. I can be a leader. And we're going to be more public. We have to learn how to use the media. When Holloman and I were driving around this afternoon, I had a call on the phone, my little funny phone, from an editor of a daily newspaper in our community who wanted to interview me, wanted to see me, and wanted to, I gave an interview on the phone, and then made an appointment to meet her at our outdoor thing, 2 hours after I got off the plane, coming back Friday. So we've got to learn how to use the conservatives are very good at this. Very good at, we're very poor at this. But it takes people that are going to stick their neck out and say, well, I can be a leader. I can take people to, you know, I can take people to New Orleans. I'm going to get together a group and go, or I can, whatever. And I don't think anybody's too young or experienced to do that. It just takes getting out beyond where you're comfortable, which is where all the fun is. Yeah.
I think at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. First off, I want to thank Reverend Bear for speaking. This is definitely a very important conversation to have, and I hope that people keep this in mind as they go forward and try to find ways to kind of go outside the box and to bring this to your church or to groups that you're working with. If you have any questions, if you're interested in maybe connecting to some groups who might be able to give you some direction depending on what issues you're interested on, you can definitely come talk to us afterwards. Please check out our lit table. There's lots of lit, all the like pastel green literature is on Don Coleman and the SOA School of Assassins, what the School of Assassins is about, the upcoming actions, what his statement was. So definitely check out those materials. If you haven't donated and you can, please donate. It'll go towards helping this event. And thank you very much for coming.
And if you want to be on my little newsletter, make sure on the list that's being passed around, that's noted. If it's not noted, and if you have a block on it for spam, you won't get mine because it doesn't look like a personal thing, look like. But if you want my little newsletter, just find the sheet and indicate on it somewhere where you'd like to get it. Otherwise, you won't. Okay? Nice to be here with you.
One announcement before you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to let people know that tomorrow night at Channing Murray Foundation, 1209 West Oregon, we're going to be showing a DVD on the Immokalee farm workers situation. in Florida. They are, they're gonna be in town in April, but tomorrow night, we're gonna have a DVD talking about their situation and a discussion afterwards, about what you can do to help. So it's tomorrow night, Channing Murray at 7:15 if you're interested in coming. And there'll be ways that you can actually help out.